Genesis 10 and 11 contain three important topics. Genesis 10 elaborates on Genesis 9, 18, and 19. The whole world was populated from Noah's three sons, and here are the first several generations of their sons and the early nations that arose from them. It is often called the Table of Nations. Genesis 11, 1 through 9 describes the event at Babel that produced many languages and caused the division of post-flood humanity into the early nations of the Middle East and Mediterranean, and then spread further. Genesis 11, 10 through 27 returns to the central focus and picks up the Messiah's genealogy from Noah's son Shem and takes it down 8 generations to Terah, who, like Noah, will have 3 sons, one of which will be quite noteworthy in the story. His name was Abram. Well, Genesis 10 and 11 is not how we would tell this now. Westerners, influenced by Greek culture, would tell this chronologically: the division event, 11, 1 through 9, and then the results, chapter 10. But Moses is compiling the historical background for a story that will very soon focus on the line of Shem to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, from which the 12 tribes of Israel will emerge, and from their midst, the Messiah to bless all nations. A very simplified portrayal of this is that Japheth's descendants tended to move east and north into what we now call Europe. Ham's descendants tended to move into Africa, although it was Nimrod who built the early powerful Mesopotamian empires. The Shemites tended to stay in the Middle East. We can make some more definite identifications of most of the early peoples noted in Genesis 10. From Japheth came the people of the northern Mediterranean and Europe. Gomer were the Sumerians, Ashkenaz the Scythians, Madai the Medes. Yavan is the Ionians, the coastline and islands of the Aegean Sea. Katim is Cyprus. Dodanim is Rhodes. Tarshish is Spain. These people populated the coastlands and islands of the northern Mediterranean. Early traditions of the Spanish Basques and Scottish Picts indicate that they believed their ancestors had traveled away from the Middle East. Other European nations had similar early traditions linking them to Noah and Japheth. While probably not Japhethites, some American Indian tribes and Central American peoples have similar ancient traditions involving long journeys and crossing great waters on their way to their eventual places of settlement. Ham's descendants were in Mesopotamia, Canaan, and moved southwest into Africa. Cush was Ethiopia, with the Cushite Nimrod establishing an early Mesopotamian empire associated with Babel, Erech, and Akkad. Mizraim was Egypt. The Ludim, Nubia. Kasluhim, the Aegean Sea area, as the origin for the Philistines. Caphtorim was the island of Crete. Put was Libya. The descendants of Canaan, according to verse 18, spread far. Sidon is the Phoenicians. Heth, the Hittites. Then there were the 7 Canaanite tribes Israel would deal with later. The Hivites were the Hurrians, and the Sinites probably moved far to the east and became the Chinese, which is why we now speak of Sino-American relations. And ancient Chinese pictographs portray the major elements of Genesis 1 through 11. Life is dirt walking and talking. A special garden to the west, temptation, and 8 people saved in a boat, and so on. Shem's descendants stayed in the Middle East. Elam are the Elamites, Asher, Assyria, Arpachshad, Chaldea, and Aram is Syria. The comment that in Peleg's day the earth was divided, verse 25, probably identifies when the language division at Babel took place, 4 generations after the flood. Shem's line will also lead to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 tribes, eventually to the Messiah through the tribe of Judah. We will pick that lineage up again in 11:10 through 27. Genesis 11, 1 through 9 shows us post-flood rebellion centered at Babel. In 11, 1 through 4, God's post-flood instructions to disperse and fill the earth were soon rejected for let's stay together and make a name for ourselves in the plains of Shinar, which is Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, the area where Sumeria, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria would arise. The tower, built with tar as the mortar, suggests this was intended to be a waterproof refuge from another flood. It also may have been a human attempt to create a way to heaven, at least a tower for astrological observations. The project is clearly an expression of human self-exaltation. Let's make ourselves a name. There was also probably an expression of a conscious rejection of God's will that they disperse in lest we be scattered. In the background, the serpent probably had his hand in this, because if all of Noah's descendants stay in one place and intermarry, the messianic lineage would be blurred and lost. In verses 5 through 7, God did not come down because he could not see what they were doing, but because he could see it. I'm going to go down there and deal with this. Well, some of God's clearest interventions into nature or human history are tied to keeping his messianic program on track. One people, one language, nothing will be impossible for them, is a testimony to human potential as God's image creatures. But we are easily suckered into using it for evil. People that could be talented computer engineers and doing good for people may become computer hackers to steal and do lots of harm. Well, dividing language was painless, but it was very effective in separating people. Now, do not miss the connection between the language miracles at Babel and Pentecost. In Genesis 11, 1 through 9, we have a miracle that was intended to result in division. To protect the Messiah's lineage, God wanted humanity to disperse into separate nations, so he divided and confused the original one language into many so that people could not understand each other. In Acts 2, 1 through 11, on Pentecost 30 A.D., God reversed the miracle at Babel so that 12 Galilean apostles spoke the gospel in the languages of all the nations represented, and all present heard and understood in their own native languages. The patriarchs were promised that an age was coming during which the Messiah's blessings would be offered to all nations. In Jesus, that time had arrived, so the language miracle on Pentecost, the perfect reversal of Babel, signaled that it was now time for all nations to regather spiritually around the Messiah Jesus. Now, back to the Messiah's lineage, part 2. In Genesis 5 through 9, the line moved from Adam to Noah. Genesis 11, 10 through 26 picks up with Noah's son Shem and moves 8 generations to Terah. The rest of Genesis will focus on 4 generations of Shem's descendants: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, and Jacob's 12 sons, who will become the 12 tribes of Jacob, or Israel. A note about the ages given in this genealogy. English Bibles follow the Hebrew Masoretic text for when the men from Shem to Terah had children, while the Greek Septuagint and Josephus add 100 years to the ages when children were born. Whereas the Masoretic text makes it appear that Babel occurred between 107 and 346 years after the flood, Josephus asserted that it occurred 530 years after the flood, which also accords with the longer time span in the Septuagint and the Samaritan Pentateuch. Finally, it is clear that the lifespans were tapering down after the flood, from 500 to 200 years. Abraham will die at 175 years, Moses at 120, and Joshua at 110. Terah's genealogical record ends with an expansion about his family that gives us some needed background about Abram and Sarai. Terah's children were Abram, Nahor, Haran, and Sarai. Haran's children were Milcah and Iscah, and then he died in Ur. Sarai was Abram's stepsister through a different mother and became his wife, but she was unable to have children. Nahor married Haran's daughter, Milcah. Now this probably seems strange to have men marrying their stepsisters and nieces, but remember, very different time and culture. We know from Nehemiah 9:7 and Acts 7:1 through 4 that God called Abram while he was still in Ur of the Chaldees. Genesis 11:31 and 32 indicates that Terah must have approved and led the trip, apparently intending to go all the way to Canaan. But he died in Haran, where God would again appear to Abram and told him to complete the journey. We will take a look at the life of Abram, whose name will be changed to Abraham, in the next segment.